conversation, and it was like it's very based on like political what is happening politically and what she wants to be aware of. And it's just like she is afraid of me of going on campus at my community college and wearing a headscarf, and I think that's very
Hey, we can talk about that later. Don't worry.
okay. Cool.
Yeah.
All right, so Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. So, inshallah, today we're going to continue what we've been talking about for some while. So, just wanted to, inshallah, um, recap some of the things that we talked about before. So just because we're going to go on YouTube, so I'm just going to stop the videos just to make sure that everybody is safe since we're going to be on YouTube. So allow me just stopped everyone's video just to keep everybody safe since we're going to go on YouTube. Okay, so let's just recap really quick what we've been doing for the past few classes. So let's go over it really quick. So number one, we are talking about purification in general. And we said that there are two types of purification in Islam. There's the purification from major impurity, which basically requires a complete shower. And we said these two major impurities are basically one when a woman basically finishes her period or finishes her postpartum, then she would just take a shower. So after she's complete with it. And number two is when one is in a state of janaba, which is after reaching basically the climax. So whether an actual penetration happened or any form of stimulating, of course, um, the person's or the person's organs, etc. So that would basically, if the person reaches the climax, that would require showering. So, and number three, if the person basically gets to, let's call it the climax right there, which is what janaba really is, and due to a wet dream. So in that situation, they would be required to do the major purification, basically showering, which we're going to be talking about in just a bit, inshallah. The second type of impurity is the minor impurity. So the first one was major impurity, and that requires a shower. And then there's the minor impurity, which just requires, let's call it the simple wudu. And when we're speaking about wudu, we're speaking about washing the face, hands, head, feet, and we talked about what requires wudu. We talked about what we wash during wudu, and we also talked about what nullifies the purification or tahara. So we're just, of course, continuing what we were talking about, and we also talked about wiping on the socks, wiping on the khuf, and went in details in that regards. We also talked about what nullifies the purification, whether that leads to major impurity or minor impurity. We talked about the direct nullifiers. We talked about the indirect nullifiers, and we went in details with that. And then we reach out to basically being at the chapter in the ritual bathing or ahkam al-ghusl. So I've got the English side of the actual Arabic book that we're using. Let's just remind ourselves what book that is. Okay, so let's just remember the English side is 76 and 64. The English side, the translation for that book is basically called A Summary of Islamic Jurisprudence, and it is available on PDF for free on many websites that you can just type in A Summary of Islamic Jurisprudence, and this is volume 1, and PDF, and you will be able to get it. In Lugha Arabiya, Al-Mulakhas al-Fiqhi, and it's the first volume, so it's pretty easy to find. And we are pretty much on page let's see, right there, that's supposedly 64. So, well, no, let me see. Let's see. Oh dear, 74. So supposedly we're on chapter 10. So if you just go for chapter 10, you'll be capable of finding that. And same thing in Lugha Arabiya. I'm using both the Arabic and the English. So we can actually see, right, see both sides. One, the evidences in the English translation and the Arabic. But the reason why I'm using both is because it is one, it's important that we would go back to the actual resources, and the English translation is not always so accurate. So I tend to put these two sides together in order for those that have the ability to see the Arabic side of it, and let's call it the blueprint of what is written for this, for the English side, and at the same time, basically to keep those notes for both of us and for all of us to actually see the details right there in Arabic and in English. And certainly the most important thing is really to see the evidences, hadith and the different ayat, and perhaps even the terminologies in Arabic, or even the different details. Okay. Let's talk about ahkam al-ghusl. So we were basically supposed to be talking about the rulings that relate to the complete showering. So what does al-ghusl mean? So the word ghusl basically means to do a ritual bath. What is a ritual bath? A ritual bath is supposed to be that you're really trying to take a shower to remove the major impurity. Okay, what is a major impurity again? So the major impurity would be one, we're speaking about really postpartum, after postpartum, so after having a baby of a child or a pregnancy that is 10 weeks and above. So whether the woman lost her baby due to a miscarriage, or whether that was an abortion, or whether that was a complete delivery later on, then in that situation, the bleeding that comes after basically the termination or the ending or having the baby, complete, or at least, of course, the first trimester, second trimester, doesn't matter. If it's a pregnancy of 10 weeks and above, then the bleeding that comes as a result of that pregnancy, that would be called postpartum. And once that happens, then she does not pray during postpartum, does not fast during postpartum as long as she's bleeding. Okay, but if the bleeding does end, whether the bleeding ended 2 days later after having the baby, or whether a couple hours later, okay, when the bleeding ends, that's when she would basically do the ghusl, basically the ritual bath. Okay, it's not just a woman that is after postpartum, but it's also a woman after she finishes her period. So if a woman finishes her period, and we're going to talk about what marks the ending of a period. So if a woman basically ends her period, then in that situation, she would be required to do the ritual bath. Well, what does it mean that she finished her period? So she's not having any bleeding anymore, no spotting anymore, and that means her period is finished. Then in order to get back to her, let's call it ritual routine in praying and basically entering the masjid, doing all the different things, then in that situation, she would have to first do the ritual bath. Did she have to do the ritual bath for fasting? The answer is no, because fasting does not require a ritual bath or even tahara. Okay, praying does. Okay, now the third one is reaching the climax, whether in a dream or whether due to any stimulation, or whether that was due to an actual relationship. Then in that situation, that would be called the state of janaba, which would require, of course, the ritual bath. And the ritual bath that is al-ghusl. Okay, so that's an explanation in breaking down the major impurity
But
and
that's
what will
only
be,
if it goes after the climax, right?
only if it goes after the climax. But if we're talking about,
And also after, if they're bleeding after 40 days, that's the cutoff, right?
okay, let me
Sorry,
explain.
sorry.
That's a
Okay,
good
I'll be
question.
quiet now.
So in terms of the climax, okay, if we're talking about things like foreplay, or we're speaking about, we're speaking about, let's say, the arousal, okay? If one did not reach the climax, then they're not required to do a ritual shower, but they would be required to just do wudu and washing the area for talking about an arousal, okay? But if they reach the climax, okay, then that requires that one would do the ritual bath, okay? Now, it's important to say that in case of penetration, whether the beginning, even if it's just the very beginning of penetration, that would still require a ritual bath, even if one, whether she or he, even if they didn't actually complete the job, okay, they would still be required to do the ritual bath. Okay, just wanted to note that one. The second question, in terms of the postpartum piece of it, we're going to talk about that later on, but I'll just, make it as a short answer really quick. So if, let's say, she's bleeding until 40 days, okay, and she's still bleeding, 40 days had passed and she's still bleeding, okay. Scholars actually had differences of opinions on the longest duration of postpartum. Okay, they all agreed the shortest duration, it doesn't matter if she stopped bleeding the second day or the third day, then that's basically the end of her nifas or postpartum. But they had differences of opinions on the longest duration. Is it 40 days, according to the Shafi'i, or is it 60 days, according to the Maliki? And I would say, well, it's not necessarily based on a certain 40 or 60 days. If we're seeing the same type of bleeding that you have been having during the time that you basically had your baby in, then in that situation, you're going to consider that as nifas. If you're starting to notice changes in the type of bleeding, okay, you're starting to notice that, hey, it has a period smell, it has a period sensation, it has the coloring of a period. In that situation, we'd say, okay, if you're capable of noticing such differences, then you're going to go and do your own evaluation, your own ijtihad. And if you're starting to see, oh, right there, I guess because I stopped nursing my baby, I'm starting to ovulate again, and here it is. I think this is looking like a period in its smell, in its texture, in its color. Then in that situation, we're going to trust your gut feeling and your, let's say, evaluation, and you're going to say, okay, this is right there a sign that I'm ovulating again, and this is looking like that this bleeding now is a period bleeding and not necessarily nifas. Although, of course, we're speaking about pretty much, those times when it's really confusing for women, but you're going to do your piece of ijtihad. And then also, if you are confused about what ruling and what really should I consider the classification for this bleeding, then you would reach out to, let's call it a fiqh specialist, in order to help you identify what ruling is related to whatever you're going through. Okay, so we're going to talk about that later on, hopefully today. Okay, but let's talk about ritual bath. Now, I think it's important to mention, if we're talking about a ritual bath, it might seem like it's a very dangerous name or some kind of a specific baptism. It's not in any way. So even if you don't know how to do it, you just know that you're required, for example, to do the ritual bath, but you're not sure how to. It's pretty simple. Just basically take that shower, and by just taking a normal shower, you're all done. Okay, so there's no confusion. If you were just to sit under the shower, take a normal shower, washing your body, washing your hair, washing basically your private part and all of that. And that's basically the end of a ritual bath. Just by having the intention, why are you doing this? Well, I'm basically having the intention internally. You don't have to utter your intention. So if you just internally have the intention that you are taking this shower because you want to be out of the major impurity, so that's basically enough. You don't have to say anything. And all the different details of probably making wudu before the shower, and probably the order of how you do the shower, all of that is a recommendation, and all of that, consider it as extra credit, and therefore you will basically get into, let's call it, the extra credit that basically has an extra power to uplifting your faith, to uplifting your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and so forth. Okay, so just wanted to note that one, and I don't want you to get confused with the name. So even if you don't fully understand all the different details, if you were to just understand in situations when I'm in a situation of a major impurity, then in that situation, I would have to take a shower. If I don't know all the different details of the highly recommended things to do, and you just basically just do, just a normal, your showering that you basically know about, and, just go under the shower, and here it is, 1 minute later, 2 minutes later, I'm basically, I've got all the water going, flowing all over my body. I'm all done. That's basically all set. Okay. All right. Let's see. Let's talk about, well, what's the evidence that we have to do that ritual bathing, or the word is ghusl, not ghasl, but ghusl. What's the difference between ghusl and ghasl? So ghasl would mean just washing. So it could be you're washing your clothes, your laundry, you're washing, I don't know, your house, whatever it is, you're washing the dishes. That's ghasl. But ghusl, with this dhamma on top of the ghain, would basically mean the ritual bathing, would basically mean the showering of your own body. Okay, that's what the difference is. Ghusl would be any type of washing dishes, washing your clothes, or whatever it is, but ghusl would be specific to washing your body. So what's the evidence that we have to be doing a ritual bath? Or why is it called ritual anyways? So it's called ritual because technically the person is clean. Okay, technically the person is clean, but Islamically, to perform certain rituals, that's why we would consider them as ritually, or at least they would have that major impurity. And when we say a major impurity, we're actually talking about ritually they're not capable of performing certain acts, and certain acts basically involving certain worship, not all. So we did talk about that before. So just go back to the notes. And also the book, you would say that, okay, which areas and what is a person that is in a major impurity, what are they not allowed to do? So that's already in the book. Okay. What are they not allowed to do? Are they, one, we said prayer, differences of opinions in regards to entering the masjid, differences of opinions on the details, to what they're not allowed to do, such as reading Quran, such as performing tawaf, etc. So what is that was supposed to be the beginning of my class time, but until Nura wakes me up. Okay. All right. Differences of opinions on certain details. So just wanted to note that one. So let's look at the ayah. The evidence is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِن كُنْتُمْ جُنُوبًا فَطَهَّرُوا. And if you are in a state of janaba, then in that situation, you must engage in do tahara. You must engage in do tahara, which basically right there in English it said, and if you are in a state of janaba, then purify yourselves. Okay, give me a second. Okay. And if you're in a state of janaba, then purify yourself. So what does that actually look like? So that's what the Prophet ﷺ had basically explained to us, I guess the generalization in the ayah. The Prophet ﷺ would explain to us, well, what does that even look like? It was a practice even during the time of the pre-Islamic period, basically during Jahiliyyah. They did also wash from janaba because it traces back all the way to the time of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. So different reasons. What requires the ritual bath? Number one, let's say it says ejaculation by a man or a woman. Well, a woman doesn't do ejaculation, but reaches the climax. Whether the person is awake or asleep. So in other words, if we're talking about asleep, we're talking about basically having what is called a wet dream. If a person is awake, so whether that was self-stimulation or let's say the different different ways of stimulations, etc., or in other words, reaching the climax, that would require making that shower. And certainly for a man, it's basically called ejaculation, but for a woman, reaching the climax. So in that situation, the person is required to basically take the ritual shower. The second one is we're speaking about, well, I mean, I wouldn't usually, I wouldn't actually use that term in such a graphic way, but I would just use a simple word for this and just say penetration. When the beginning of a penetration, so whether we're speaking about the beginning or whether we're speaking about complete penetration, because of when the Prophet ﷺ had actually said, when one, in quote, the Prophet ﷺ said, when anyone sits amidst four parts of the woman, that is speaking about, of course, the different parts of the woman, private part, etc., and the circumcised parts, we're speaking about the genitals, they touch each other, a ritual bath becomes obligatory for both. So whether an actual completion did happen or not, it still requires that both would make that ghusl. Okay, whether she reached the climax or not, that doesn't matter. Okay, let's see. Number 3, he said embracing Islam, and that's actually differences of opinions between scholars. When a person converts to Islam, do they have to take that complete shower and before, let's say, teaching them salah, before teaching them anything, or even before entering the masjid? Are we going to say, wait, you can't come in until you actually take a shower? So not quite. And that's that differences of opinions between scholars. And you could see, at least in the book, certainly he regarded that the preponderant, according to the book, is that if a person becomes Muslim, Muslim, then they would have to take a shower, but there are differences of opinions between scholars in that regards. Number one is that we had a number of different cases of Sahaba becoming Muslim, and when they had become Muslim, the Prophet ﷺ didn't say, well, you have to go take a shower and come back to me. Okay, we didn't have these notes of the Prophet ﷺ ordering them to go take a shower before he would engage in any conversation or in any relationship. So therefore, this is actually a strong opinion that a ritual bath is not necessarily mandatory once a person becomes Muslim, unless they were in a situation that required ritual bathing anyways. So perhaps maybe that they were maybe in a situation, perhaps the woman was on her period, then in that situation, we'll just explain that, hey, you don't pray right now. Once you're done with your period, take a shower, and then we'll teach you how to pray and the details in that regards. Okay, but just because a person had become Muslim, it does not necessarily mean that they have to take a shower. In other words, if let's say this person became Muslim, okay, and didn't take a shower, does that mean that their Islam is not accepted? The answer is no. That doesn't mean their Islam is not accepted. The ritual bath is not a requirement because the person had become Muslim, because it's not like some sort of baptism, okay? It's basically required in case the person is actually in a state of impurity. Then in that situation, that's what would require that, and not necessarily just becoming Muslim. Okay, and we had seen many cases. In fact, the disbelievers would come into the masjid, have conversations with the Prophet ﷺ, and certainly those conversations involved some of them becoming Muslim and sometimes others not becoming Muslim, but they would still come into the masjid, hold these conversations. So just because someone is not Muslim, it doesn't necessarily mean they cannot enter the masjid. They can enter the masjid, and if they wanted to be respectful and put on a hijab, well, good for them, but they're not required to actually put on a hijab. And speaking of which, just entering the masjid does not require putting on a hijab. So let's say you're the masjid's janitor, okay? And you are basically responsible for surveillance cameras and so forth, and you happen to be given, I guess, a room at the masjid that basically you are the security and also the janitor for, and let's say you are in the masjid. Is it every time you enter the musalla, or at least the area that is designated, that is designated for prayer, are you required to wear hijab? The answer is no. Are you required to make wudu before entering the masjid? The answer is no. That's what I wanted to get to. That entering the masjid does not require covering. So if, for example, it's a woman, she doesn't have to have her hijab on just for the masjid, but she would have her hijab on if other non-mahram men are around, but not necessarily because she's entering the masjid. Okay, so same thing. Some will see it as, well, this place is sacred. We have to order even the non-Muslim people or the Muslims to put on hijab, etc. Well, if you wanted to do it for the sanctity of the place, well, good for you. That's all right. That's great. But it's not a requirement to order, the disbelievers that probably want to come in, get to know Islam, ask any questions. We don't have to have these hijabs at the door, and every single person that wants to enter, or at least every woman that wants to enter, we're going to say, oh, you cannot enter until you would wear the hijab. So that's not necessarily a requirement. Just wanted to note that one. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ, in certain cases, we know that the Prophet ﷺ in certain cases gave that order or at least recommended. So that's that differences of opinions. And how do we read this? Is it mandatory to take a shower, or is it that the Prophet ﷺ was recommending that they would take a shower? How do we understand that verb that the Prophet ﷺ told them to go take a shower? Do we understand it as an imperative verb giving them an order to take that shower, or is it giving them that recommendation? So that's that area of differences of opinions. Okay, the second one is death. Okay, so if a person dies, we would basically do the same thing as a ritual bath. And this is important to say because many times people are really confused on how the bathing or the showering is done for a person that had basically died. There's really nothing to it. You're just basically washing the person. The usage of perhaps the kafur, or probably using soap, or probably using maybe, I don't know, dried flowers, or probably musk, or any of that. That's a sunnah and not necessarily required. So if a person dies, of course, we would wash that person and shroud that person. The idea and the concept of washing the person is pretty simple. It's just washing the person just like you would wash a living person, except the only difference is that you would cover their private area. So basically from the belly button to the knee, that would always be completely covered, and you would use, let's say, gloves or something as a glove, like a mitten or something, in order to make sure you're not directly touching the dead person's private parts when you're washing their body. But in general, the whole idea of how do we wash the dead person, it's just really simple. It's just all about washing the person the same way that you would wash a living person, except you're just hiding their private parts and you're covering it with a towel, with a plastic bag if you want, you probably a huge plastic bag just to make sure that it's covering everything that's also permissible as well. And the shrouding, you're basically shrouding with something that is not a sewn fabric, but it doesn't have to be of a specific color. Okay, but it is recommended for it to be white. We're going to get to that later on, but of course, it is obligatory to wash and shroud the dead Muslim person, whether male, female, young, or old, and the only people exempt from that are basically the martyrs. The martyrs are the only ones that are exempt from washing and shrouding, okay? And the one that is exempt from the complete shrouding, which is, well, of course, not covering the head, is basically the person in Hajj, but they would also be washed. Okay, let's continue right there. So that's what is that supposed to be? Number 5 and 6 is menstrual and postnatal bleeding. So we talked about that. So what's the evidence? What's the evidence? Is it right here? Is it right here somehow wanting to be just misogynist and wanting women to do an extra purification? No, it's not. Because the Prophet ﷺ said, فَإِذَا أَقْبَلَتْ حَيْضَتُكِ فَدَعِ الصَّلَاةِ وَإِذَا أَدْبَرَتْ فَاغْسِلِي عَنْكِ الدَّمَ ثُمَّ صَلِّي. The Prophet ﷺ had said, so when your menstruation period begins, give up performing prayer, and when it ends, wash off the bleeding and then perform the prayer. Okay, so that's basically to let us know that this is a quote, basically a direction coming from the Prophet ﷺ and teaching us that when a woman is basically on her period, that she would not perform the prayer and she does not have to make it up either. Okay, and once the prayer is finished, then it said, well, فَاغْسِلِي عَنْكِ الدَّمَ ثُمَّ صَلِّي. Then wash away. When we're saying فَاغْسِلِي عَنْكِ الدَّمَ, this doesn't mean that she's still on her period, but this is wash off basically the remains or probably dried or the effect or probably what might remain from that impurity of the menstrual bleeding. So you're basically washing it off. So she's doing that ritual bleeding not while she's on her period, but once she's done entirely, including no spotting. And we're going to talk about, well, what about the brown discharge? What about the different colors, etc.? We'll talk about that later. Okay. So once we would rule that she's done entirely with her period, that's when we would say, okay, now you're ready for the ritual bath, go and take a shower, and you would be now, of course, ready to perform your prayer if it's time for your prayer, and basically do the other things that you were prevented from doing as a result of the major impurity. Okay, let's see the other ayah. فَإِذَا تَطَهَّرْنَا. The ayah is literally saying if they had purified themselves, speaking in regards to women. When the ayah was speaking in regards to women, whether we're speaking about menstrual or whether we're speaking about postpartum, that's basically to interpret, well, what is فَإِذَا تَطَهَّرْنَا? And if they basically reached that purification, and we're speaking about whether physically that impurity ended, and تَطَهَّرْنَا would basically be a higher level of purity. In other words, it's not that she ended her impurity physically, but it's also that she had washed and done the ritual bathing to make sure that she is completely done. Okay, so what is the way to do the ritual bath? How do we actually do it? Number one is having the intention to take and make the ritual bath. Okay, that's the first thing. So what do you mean having intention? Like, how does that actually work? Do I sit, in a corner and somehow do this real strong focus? No, it's not like that. Just give me a second. Okay, so how does that actually happen? So the intention is basically just an inner feeling. It's an inner focus, and it doesn't have to be in any form or shape that you're sitting down, taking a corner, and I don't know, sitting in a corner and trying to get your focus strong and all of that. No, it doesn't go like that. Just
Was
by
that mostly Hanafi?
that said that you have to do that. So you mean Hanafi to do what? To do
To say it out loud?
that's Shafi'i.
Oh, Shafi'i. Okay. Because I knew it was in Syria. I don't know which. Okay.
Yeah, it's
Jazakallah khair.
Shafi'i were the ones that basically said you gotta utter and say your intention out loud. Okay, that was the Shafi'i, that they would say the intention, and Ibn Hazm would make a complete mockery of that. Okay, but we don't actually have any notes that the Prophet ﷺ had said that you would utter your intention. Okay, so no need to utter it, and you just basically do what you need to do, and just by having intention, just on the inside. Why did you do this? Well, on the inside your motives. Okay, so by recognizing your motives, the reason why you're doing this, then that is what would consider you putting your intention in place. Okay, beginning with tasmiyah. So those would be a sunnah. Okay, the part about having the intention, that's obligatory. Okay, but not for the Hanafis. The Hanafis, they regarded as long as the person took the shower, it doesn't necessarily have to have that intention. because in general, according to the Hanafis, well, the actual showering is done, and the reason for it, the intention for it, as long as the actual bathing is done, it's kind of like washing hands. As long as the actual thing is done, you're all set, according to the Hanafis. Okay. But majority of the scholars, they regarded that no, there has to be a specific intention to remove the impurity. You're not taking a shower because you're feeling too humid or sorry, I'm in Malaysia, so humidity is one main reason why people take a shower here, or why I would recommend taking a shower. At least not everyone does it. But okay, let's see the other things. Beginning with tasmiyah. What is tasmiyah? Let's see. By the way, like in this book, they made it as an endnote and not a footnote. And I find it really strange, but anyhow, so tasmiyah would mean that you would say Bismillah. Not Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, but Bismillah. So wait a minute. Am I supposed to be saying Bismillah in the bathroom too? I thought you weren't supposed to say the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the bathroom. So in the shower area, there's a separation between the shower area and also the area that you would do your call of nature. So if you're in the shower area, you can say Bismillah. Okay. You can say Bismillah while you're doing it. What if you had forgotten? Your bathing is still valid, even if you had forgotten. That doesn't mean that you basically have to do it again. No, it's because this is a sunnah. It is recommended. It's an extra credit. Think of it as an extra credit, but not necessarily obligatory. Therefore, it doesn't void it. Let's see. The second part is washing one's hands thrice. What does that look like? So before you start washing your private area and etc., make sure just to stay, of course, clean, and make sure your hands are not probably contaminated with something else without you realizing. So wash your hands before you even touch your private part, just to make sure you're safe, just to make sure you're clean. All right. So in that situation, you would basically wash your hands before engaging in the actual purification to basically keep you clean entirely. So washing the hands before. What does washing the hands thrice actually mean? Like, how do you wash your hands 3 times? I just put my hands under the top and just wash it. What does it mean to do 3 times? Okay. So when you're talking about 3 times, you're basically considering that going around. So one hand is considered as rotating around the other hand once, twice, second time, and a third time. So that's basically what it means. And of course, to explain that one, we're washing the hand. So as long as you're letting the water run over your hand or run over your body, that's what washing means. Okay. Wiping is different. Wiping is when your hand is probably wet, and your wet hand, you would basically run it across the surface of probably your head. That's called wiping. Washing means you're letting the water fully run over your body or your hand or whatever it is. That's what washing means. Washing one's genitalia. Okay, the private part, basically washing that, and that is basically what another term for it is called istinja. Okay, let me write that down. Istinja or istinja. So what is istinja? So whether you're using a bidet or whether you probably filled maybe I don't know, a bottle of water and you wash that private area, that basically will suffice. Do I have to use my hands to wash? The answer is no. You don't have to use your hands to wash if you're disgusted. Okay, you don't have to use your hands, but basically run an enough amount of water to cleanse the area. Okay, and a good amount of water to cleanse the area, and definitely, certainly, using the hands to remove any impurity is definitely recommended. Okay, so that would be istinja. So, okay, what are we doing now? We're saying Bismillah, we're washing our hands before we even touch our private part, just to make sure we're not getting that area infected with anything, and then we're washing the private area. Okay, like we said, you don't have to use your hands if you don't want to. Okay, performing full ablution. What does that even mean? So we're speaking about doing a complete wudu. Before I even take a shower? Yeah, that's the sunnah. You don't have to, but this is the sunnah. To perform the wudu. What is wudu? Washing face, hands, head, feet. Remember that rule? Face, hands, head, feet. So face, we talked about wudu, washing the face, washing the hands. And when we're speaking about the hands, we're basically talking about, well, arms, okay, up to the elbow, head, wiping the head once, and washing the feet up to the ankles. But wait a minute, but anyways, I'm going to be taking a shower, so do I have to wash my feet? So that's the sunnah, to do a wudu, okay, and then continue with, of course, the process of doing that complete showering. Now, one thing to say is that this method was more, I guess, easier to understand when they were doing it the traditional way. So they didn't have showers back then, obviously. Okay. What they used to have was just buckets, and they would have kind of like a tub. Well, it's not a tub per se, but it's like a big utensil. They would stand in it and basically pour the water over themselves to cleanse themselves. The water would be basically hot water and diluted with cold water to basically make sure that it suits the person's likes, of course, the person's choice of the temperature for the water, and they would basically make this shower. How much of that water did the Prophet ﷺ actually use? So looking at, it was called a saw. So we're looking at approximately a gallon and 2/3 of a gallon. So we're almost 2 gallons of water, to, in fact, even less. Okay. To make a complete shower, even less. Okay. And when we're speaking about almost a gallon and a half, or a gallon and 2/3 of a gallon, so we're looking at, that's pretty much just the amount to wash all the body. We don't need to waste a lot of water. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, washing one's head, well, that's because they didn't have showers. So now, after doing those steps of saying Bismillah, washing the hands, then washing the private part, then making wudu, then washing that, pouring basically the water over the head. Now, did they used to use shampoo? They didn't have shampoo, but they did have something that was considered as organic shampoo. That organic shampoo is basically called al-ghasl. Okay, let me, or maybe I could, right there. I actually showed you that substance before, unless you want me to show you that again. Okay, and they would get the foam of it. Okay, so it was this organic type of a tree. Okay, and then they would dry those leaves. They kind of look like bay leaves. Maybe I should show you that. Okay. Should I show you that? Okay. And then they would dry it, they would crush it, and then once it's diluted with water, it makes a foam, and that was basically their shampoo. That was basically their soap. Okay. If you wanted to use your, I guess, your favorite soap, that's also permissible too. Do you have to use soap? Do you have to use shampoo? The answer is no, but if you want to, well, good for you. Okay, let's see. And by the way, this substance that is their organic substance that would actually be really good for your hair. So for those that have problems probably with hair falling or problems with hair splits and all of that, that organic substance is actually really good for the hair. Just like henna. It looks exactly like henna. Okay, so let's see. And then of course, completely, let's say pouring water over one's whole body and rubbing it with hands to make sure that it reaches all the body. So we're speaking about now completely showering and completely doing what is needed to shower. Okay. And basically, whether sitting under the shower or what about not necessarily sitting under the shower? What about probably making it as a bath? Okay, so in other words, going into the tub. As long as the water is filling in other words, it's basically going all over the body, and that is coming with the intention, then in that situation, the person is considered as doing a ritual bath. Let's give another example. Let's just say this person was supposed to do a ritual bath. I mean, before they would jump into a pool, you would always hope that these people are taking a shower and not getting their, their let's call it impurity into the pool, but let's just assume that this person was pushed into the pool, or they just jumped into the pool and they didn't actually take a shower. Then in that situation, if they had the intention and they just dived into the pool and didn't go through any of this process, then that's still considered as check. You basically had a complete shower right there. Okay, so in other words, removal of that major impurity. Okay, let's see. A question is probably a common question. Do we have to unbraid our hair? Okay, and especially, I think I talked about all of this. I don't know why I feel like I talked about this, maybe I talked about it so many times that I forgot when I last talked about it. Okay, so what about a woman or a man, especially basically people of color, doing the braids and all of that? Do they have to unbraid their braids to basically wash and do the ritual bath? And the answer is no. They don't have to unbraid their braids to do the ritual bath. There are differences of opinions, just a note. There are differences of opinions on, some scholars actually said they would have to unbraid for janaba, but not they would have to not janaba, but unbraid for period, but not unbraid for janaba. And they don't have to unbraid for janaba. Some scholars made a difference and distinguished between the two, and other scholars, which is preponderant, that there is no difference. So whether the sister of color or whether she's of color or not, they basically had the braids, whether it was a result basically of janaba or whether it was a result of menstruation. Do they have to unbraid their hair? The answer is the preponderant is no difference between janaba and the impurity as a result of janaba, sexual climax, basically. Okay. And the impurity as a result of a period and a postpartum, and therefore they don't have to unbraid their hair. That's to just clarify that one. What about using extensions? So using extensions for human hair, natural hair, human hair, or animal hair is basically haram. But if we're talking about synthetic extensions, differences of opinions on the ruling of a synthetic extension. Same thing if we're talking about wigs as well. Is that permissible? To use differences of opinions, and of course, if it is preventing the water from penetrating the head, then in that situation, just to note, then you would have to remove what is preventing the water from penetrating the head. But I basically had fixed my hair, and I don't want to ruin whatever I had done to my hair. So you don't have to thoroughly let water get through every single hair. So it is enough to just basically get 3 handfuls of water and just put it over your head or your hair. Okay. Layla Ali, you had a question. Go ahead, dear.
Yeah, my question was, so you have to start with your right side, like when you're washing your hair, everything has gone. That's what my
So
understanding was.
right, the sunnah is to basically start with the right side at all times, okay? And so whether you're speaking about wearing your shoes, wanting to probably, I don't know, drink your coffee or whatever it is, always stimulating the right side is always something that the Prophet ﷺ had recommended. Whether you're taking a shower, I don't drinking your coffee, whatever you're doing, stimulating the right side. It was quite interesting. We were, I showed it to the other class the other day. It was really interesting. A study was actually saying that when they were stimulating the right side of people, that it was getting them a sense of the existence of God, or it was basically stimulating that side of them. It was quite interesting to see this study that people, when their right side was stimulated, they basically had some sides of their body, or at least some sides of their brain, which is the side that was responsible of the person recognizing their existence, recognizing themselves, recognizing the area that usually is provoked during a moment of ritual practice or prayer or etc. is they're seeing that correlation. It's quite interesting. But regardless of that, the sunnah is to always start with the right side, because it stimulates the right side and gives you basically that connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, it's not necessarily that study that said that. It's basically the Prophet ﷺ letting us know that stimulating the right side, always using everything on with the right hand, the right body, the right side of the body first, etc. Always the right side is basically an extra credit. And when we say an extra credit, we usually think of an extra credit to mean just an extra point on Judgment Day. We usually don't think that it basically promotes.
It's like the extra sprinkles when you go and get an ice cream, right? The
Well,
extra
yes.
toppings.
Right, but what I'm actually wanting to infer right here is whenever you do a sunnah, if you're struggling with faith, and I don't mean by struggling with faith meaning you're doubting your religion, okay? That's a misconception that you really have to do, some further research, some further study. That's more of a, let's say, mental study, than in further study that way. But I'm talking about that extra credit from that angle, that it will strengthen your faith. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, that those sunan or those practices that are extra credit. Okay, if you're trying to grow in your faith, you're trying to grow in your spirituality, well, those extra credits that we're referring to are basically tips to help you grow in your faith, to help you strengthen your relationship with your spirituality, with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically, and strengthen you in your relationship with your Islam. So from going from the level of Islam to probably going to the level of Iman to probably going from the level of Iman to probably the level of Ihsan and so forth. Well, those tips of Sunan definitely don't miss out on. If you want to go from the level of Islam to another level, which is the level of Iman, make sure you continue practicing those things because they will strengthen your faith. Okay, let's see. The sister is also asking, does the water have to reach all the scalp? Can a spot be missed? Okay, so this is actually differences of opinion. Some scholars actually considered, like we said earlier, some scholars actually said there is a hadith, and I'm sure the sister is referring to that the Prophet ﷺ actually said under each and every single hair, there is blood and there is janaba. And according to this hadith, well, that would mean that the water would have to run thoroughly under each and every single hair, and that you should not be missing out on any part, and that you would basically ensure and make sure that the water is thoroughly going into your scalp, and you're basically rubbing your head and all of that. But this hadith is actually not an authentic hadith. And when the Sahabiya asked the Prophet ﷺ, there is a stronger hadith when that female companion came to the Prophet ﷺ and she said, well, you know, she has trouble unbraiding her hair, and it's hectic on her to unbraid her hair every single time she wanted to wash her hair, and especially for women with long hair, or probably you know, sisters of color, you know, braids, and having many braids right there, that definitely takes a long time to braid and a lot of money. It costs a lot of money to braid and make those braids, and certainly there are a lot of braids, so to unbraid them would take some time, and certainly to let the water and guarantee that the water is penetrating, all of that. So the Prophet ﷺ just said, إنما يكفيك أن تحثي عليه 3 حثيات. And the Prophet ﷺ said, it's enough for you to just get 3 handfuls of water and just pour it over your head. So that would give the inference that no, you don't have to have the water running over each and every single part of your scalp. So if you were to generally just pour that water over your head, that should suffice. Okay, so you had 3 handfuls, 1 handful, basically, second handful, third handful over your head, that would basically be enough to do. Okay, so same thing if you probably had a pig's tail, or probably had a ponytail, etc., whatever you call that, that would basically mean the same thing. Okay, any other questions in regarding to that? Same thing if it's a man. Okay, let's see in the chat right there. Okay, so whether it's a man or a woman, it doesn't make a difference if we're talking about a ritual bath. Doesn't make a difference whether it's a man that had their hair braided. There's nothing wrong with men braiding their hair whatsoever. Okay, it's culture. If men wanted to do their hair braids and have long hair, it's all about culture. So can men actually have a ponytail? Is that okay? The answer is yes. It's a cultural thing. If within that culture only women wear their hair that way, then in that situation, that would be imitating women, and don't do that. But if it within that culture, and let's give an example, within certain cultures, we're talking about like Native Americans, that men would have braids, men would have long hair, and of course, it was a way to keep them warm, etc., or it was basically just a sign or a way of beauty. That's also permissible. And it's not against the religion for men to have long hair or even braid their hair. It all depends on the culture. If within that culture, men braiding their hair is not exclusive to women, then yeah, sure you can. What about those, those, the hair locks, and they would have they would use things like, what do they call that? Like gel, and then they would continue to wear their hair with all those locks and stuff. And they would use Vaseline, or sometimes would use gel and continue to roll their hair. I think that there was a group, I forgot what they were called, but from Jamaica, they would wear their hair that way, and it was famous. So if that, you would know that culture better. I don't know if that is exclusive to those groups of people, but if we're talking about certain, let's say certain people, they basically, it's part of their culture and they like wearing their hair that way. Okay, raster, I don't know. I don't know if that's what they're called. But if, let's say that they wanted to wear their hair that way, I know that in Africa, forgot what they were called, but in certain African countries, they would use mud. And the mud is what they would, I guess, use on their hair to get it fixed, etc. So can they actually use mud or use gel to basically make the hair locks? And is it against Islam to do those hair locks? Okay, the answer is it's not against Islam. Okay, if someone wanted to wear their hair that way, unless that was a practice that it was exclusive to a certain religious group, or it doesn't have to be a religious group, but a deviant group, then in that situation, it would be haram to imitate that group. Okay, so we're not just talking about hair, but let's just say, for example, certain way of wearing your clothes was only, or at least commonly, worn by a certain group of people, deviant group of people. Maybe it was a gang group, maybe, wearing all black, for example. We know that the Gothics, for example, would wear that way with black, at least during my time, they were called Gothics. I don't know what they're called. I think they're called emo now, but during my time when I was a teenager, they were called Gothics. We had a lot of Gothics in my school. I have no idea why, but during my high school, we had a lot of Gothics. So they would wear basically black shoes, black lipstick, black nail polish, and black, black eyeliner. So that was basically their attire. What if a Muslim said, well, I just like that style. I'm not a Gothic, I'm Muslim, but I like that style. We would say, well, since this is their style, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man tashabbaha biqawmin fahuwa minhum." Whoever mimics any group in their lifestyle, in their attire, in basically their appearance or their practices, then you had become a part of them. So the Prophet ﷺ was teaching us that this isn't just an issue of liking something, but if you somehow would appear like a certain group of people, then you had just become a part of them. So the way to, let's say, cleanse your iman, the way to help shape your identity, is that you also have to recognize that the way you dress, the way you talk, even the type of language that you would use, is basically going to determine a lot of how you feel about yourself. How you feel about yourself is going to affect you not only mentally, but it's going to affect you spiritually as well. So that's that area. So if wearing the hair, for example, or even piercing, okay, regardless of the piercing, we're speaking about certain piercing, for example, is practiced by, let's say, certain groups to fit in, etc. Piercing is not only involving harming certain parts of the body, and we're not only looking at the medical side of it, that hey, you're basically opening another opening and possibly getting infected and all of that. That's one side, definitely supporting the opinion to tell you not to do it. But the other piece of it that regardless of the medical side of it, is basically the spiritual side of it. If such piercing is practiced by, let's say, deviant groups within that culture, then in that situation, it's not befit for you to want to mimic and imitate these groups. So whether we're speaking about nose piercing, lip piercing, whatever piercing, etc., that it's not something that is practiced by, let's say decent groups, then in that situation, don't do it just for the sake of fitting in. And Islam wanted you to be a person of confidence, a person of faith, a person that wants to fit in with the mu'mineen and not fit in with deviant groups. Want to keep in mind that shaitan had actually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala quoted in the Quran what shaitan had said, that he will use deforming the bodies as a method to deforming the people's instincts, the people's spirituality, and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created within them. So in order to change what is within you in terms of instinct, in terms of spirituality, in terms of mind programming, etc., the shaitan will always use the method to deforming your body. And that's what's happening right now. Plastic surgery is a trend, and facelift and face whatever, and making your lips big and enhancing certain body parts. That is actually haram to do. That is haram to do, and it would only be permissible to change and do plastic surgery in case where there is an actual deformity. We're talking about medical. Maybe the person got burnt, maybe they had an accident and that really deformed their shape, their appearance, or probably their body, etc. Then that's it. Or probably had a mastectomy, breast cancer, and then they needed to do a mastectomy. So now, of course, wanted to do, I guess, the replacement for that, even though it wouldn't be an actual thing, it's more of an aesthetic thing. And it's definitely not going to be an actual thing. Certainly, they're going to be using silicone, etc., to give it the appearance of an actual breast, but we know it's not actually an actual breast, okay, because of a medical reason. She had mastectomy and needed to correct and at least remove that deformity. Then in that situation, that would be permissible. But to do, whether it's Brazilian, you know what I'm talking about, or whether it's puffing the lips or whatever it is, that would actually be considered a way of deforming the body, and therefore the satanic way to influencing the person, the human being's instinct, the human being's spirituality as well, because it's redirecting their focus from looking and focusing on their spirituality to focusing on their appearance. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, it's not your appearance that matters. Your appearance is just fine, unless there's an actual deformity. Okay, your appearance is just fine. I want you to focus on your heart. I want you to focus on your akhlaq, on changing your mannerisms. That's what really matters. That's what makes you of a good person. That's what will enhance and increase your rank on Judgment Day. Okay, let's continue with, if there are any questions in regards to these topics, I'd be happy, since we're talking about it. I know that, these topics are really are really important to many women. Okay, let's continue right there. And of course, certainly that's that hadith that Sister Samira was referring to possibly. تحت كل شعرة جنابة فاغسلوا الشعر وأنقوا البشر. Okay, or al-Bashra right there. That hadith is probably the hadith that she was referring to. Like I said, differences of opinions between scholars on the valid or the authenticity of this note. It is not necessarily an authentic hadith, so I just wanted to note that one. Okay, let's see. Other recommendations in terms of washing and showering is basically covering. And because the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّ اللَّهَ حَيِّيٌّ سِتِّيرٌ يُحِبُّ الْحَيَاءَ وَالسِّتْرَ فإذا اغتسل أحدكم فليستتر. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a bashful one, sittir, and basically covered. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves being bashful and loves that one would be modest and covering up. So basically the public showering, you don't want to uncover entirely. Make sure that you are covered up. Well, what if they are uncovered? I basically have a towel over my waist. Okay, so my private part is not appearing, but the other people, well, I know they're naked, but I'm not. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ said, do not look at the private part of a dead person or of a living person. Not a living person, not a dead person. And even if the person is not Muslim, you don't want to look at their private part. So even if they're okay with it, it's going to affect you spiritually to normalize such behavior. It's going to affect you spiritually to see people that are naked, probably in the fitness areas, or probably taking showers naked, etc., regardless of whether the person was your brother, your own mother, or whatever, sister, etc. At the end, since the person had reached the age of puberty, you should not be looking at their private area, and certainly whether the person is Muslim or not Muslim. Such things are not permissible to do. Okay, and certainly purification is a serious issue, and not taking it seriously is one reason for why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would punish us in the graves, and certainly in this life. It will affect our faith. It will affect our faith. It will affect our spirituality. And without us realizing, many times people would come to me and say, I don't know why I'm not capable of focusing on my prayer. I'm not sure why I'm not capable of focusing on my dhikr, etc. One reason to this is not having that purification in place, whether we're speaking about major or minor purification. In fact, there is a hadith when the Prophet ﷺ was praying Salat al-Fajr. He was reading Surah al-Rum, and then the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّهُ لَا يُلَبَّسُ عَلَيْنَا, that it's basically making it hard. In other words, someone is, and he explained why, and he said, where I'm trying to recite, but the recitation is not in full clarity in my mind. And he said, well, that's because some of you are not having their purification in place, their purification is incomplete, or their purification is not done right, and therefore it's affecting us. Okay, so if it's affecting the individuals that are next to that person, well, affecting the person, him or herself, is definitely inevitable then. If it's affecting the Prophet's ability to focus on his recitation, and affecting for, let's say, gathering in a prayer, and we're not capable of getting the best of our spirituality, the best of our focus, the best of our recitation, and certainly one of the main reasons is we're having people join us and It's basically that impurity that is there that's affecting us. If it's affecting the people next to you, then definitely it's going to be inevitable that it will affect the person himself or herself, spiritually, mentally, because hey, if you're saying I cannot focus, that would mean that losing focus mentally, spiritually, etc., is also affected by the person's spirituality or the person's purification, sorry. So we're speaking about purification or impurity as well, penetrating through the skin and perhaps even through the environment that is around you and affecting you mentally, affecting you spiritually, affecting your heart, etc., without you realizing. Okay. And if you were to look at, for example, in Surah Al-Muddathir, I always point that one out. Always point that one out. In Surah Al-Muddathir, let's really fast just open that one up really quick. And we always mention that one. This is really important because it's actually part of faith. Purification is part of faith, learning and recognizing that that the first chapter that we would learn after doing our shahada is involving faith, is involving basically tahara. And that's extremely important to discuss. This isn't just an extra thing or an extra class or, yeah, it's basically fiqh, therefore not important. Not quite. It is actually part of faith. That's why the first, amongst the first ayat that were revealed in the early times of Islam, the Prophet ﷺ was mentored basically by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, was directed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ya ayyuhal muddathir, oh, the one that is all bundled up in his blanket, qum fa'anzir, you're up for a mission, get up for basically preparing yourself, getting ready, and go and get yourself basically with the intention, with the commitment that you're a person on a mission to warn others about Judgment Day, to warn others that they're basically that their life is basically of purpose. Therefore, they should take their matter seriously. So, وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. How do I become a person on a mission? Where do I start to be a person on a mission? Well, first, رَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. You need to glorify your Lord on the inside first, before you say Allahu Akbar. If you don't consider your Lord Almighty as your number one priority, then there's no way that your Lord Almighty is going to be your number one priority in life practices. So, رَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ, then glorify your Lord. But after glorifying your Lord, after that aqidah, that creed is in place, that's when you're going to go for a stage 2, ثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. You need to make sure your garments are pure, your body is pure. You want to make sure that you recognize what makes impurity, because impurity penetrates far beyond your garment to basically penetrating your skin, and it's going to be affecting your body. It's going to be affecting your heart, etc. Think of it as, hey, you could put a patch, for example, or probably put some kind of a basically some kind of a medicine or whatever it is on your skin. You would think of it as, oh, it's just local within that area, but you don't recognize that. No, it's going beyond. It's basically your blood vessels, your nerves, etc. All of that is basically going to carry some information. It's affecting you mentally, it's affecting you spiritually, it's affecting your heart, it's affecting your identity. This is really important. And that's why the books of fiqh, all books of fiqh, all the books of Islamic jurisprudence, they all start this, the first chapter, the chapter of Tahara, before even talking about prayer, before talking about Ramadan, before talking about anything in regards to religious or legislating practices. It would always start with Tahara. This is extremely important. وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. in order to be a person on a mission, yes, your creed has to be in place, but there's that purification that you have to take that as seriously. وَالرُّجْزَ فَاهْجُرْ, and you have to recognize and abandon, whether we're speaking about rujz, meaning more of a comprehensive word to mean specific impurity. We're talking about the different kinds of, let's call it the physical impurities, or whether we're speaking about the actual impurities, or whether we're speaking about metaphorical impurities. We're speaking about behavioral impurities, whether you're looking at the wrong thing, you're talking and using basically the wrong words or wrong practices, or probably hang out with the wrong environment. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, in order for you to be a person of mission, a person of an identity, there are certain practices that you basically have to take as this isn't you, you don't belong there, whether we're speaking about people using certain kinds of language, or whether it's an environment, or whether it's a certain practice, a behavior, maybe involving what you say, what you're listening to, what you're looking at. There are certain things that you just have to distance yourself from. That's what the word fahjur means. Fahjur means you have to distance yourself from that, because without you realizing, it will affect you. Now that I'm looking at tayammum, we did actually do bab al-ghusl before, but I guess we're repeating it. Doesn't hurt to repeat. Okay. What I'm gonna do, I'm gonna give you guys like a 3-minute break. Okay. And Noura, is our class finished, or what am I doing? Am I going beyond my class time, or what's happening? Noura, are you there? Oh dear, Noura's not there. Did I mute her, or what happened? Are we going beyond our class time, or? Okay, let's see. Here's the sister saying, what would you say to someone who does give importance to body appearance, do would be different, due to the hadith or ayat that says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves things that are beautiful, and also that sister that might say, I do this for my husband or whatnot. Okay, fair enough. So when we use the evidences that are comprehensive wordings, generalized text, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves everything that is beautiful. Okay, all right. And then she says, well, the reason why I'm going out with full makeup and basically, all that appearance is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves everything that is beautiful, and therefore I'm basically wanting to practice the sunnah. Yeah, that would be a nice way of self-manipulation, but not manipulating Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or manipulating the evidence. Okay. Self-manipulation, it works. But in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, in order for us not to confuse the narratives and not to confuse ourselves with such rhetoric, the Prophet ﷺ basically had given the regulations on what it means and where it means that I'm doing it for my husband. There are certain things, even if your husband liked that. I remember having a sister that was telling me that her husband just loved tattoos and he just wanted her to wear a tattoo. Okay. And I said, even if, and it was in a private area, okay, it wasn't going to be appearing to anyone but her husband. But of course, the hadith is straightforward, and the hadith is clear. لعن الله النامصة والمتنمصة الواشمة والمستوشمة. The hadith is pretty straightforward, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had cursed those that do extensions, those that do those braiding the teeth in a certain way, and those that do tattooing. So whether it was the husband wanting that for a beautification, or whether it was yourself, or whether it wasn't going to appear to anybody but for the husband, it would still be considered as impermissible. So in other words, the Inna Allaha Jamilun Yuhibbul Jamal is very comprehensive, and you cannot use that as evidence to say, well, Inna Allaha Jamilun Yuhibbul Jamal, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves beauty, so therefore I'm gonna fix my hair, I'm gonna put full makeup and going to dress up and basically appear like that in front of non-mahrams. Hey, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Inna Allaha Jamilun. It's like, you're just doing that self-manipulation. Doesn't work here, because you're not going to take one text and leave out the other text that laid out the regulation of, well, to what amount? How do we understand that? How do we apply that? Okay, because if you're just taking a myopic reading, you're just reading one hadith and not wanting to read the other, then you're self-manipulating yourself. Well, you're just doing that self-manipulation, and you want to convince yourself that I've got everything in place and here's my evidence, and you're not taking the rest of the hadith. Well, that's exactly like a person reading in Surah.
Isn't that in Surah al-Baqarah?
Which one?
What you're talking about?
I'm not sure.
Okay, never mind.
I don't know. I don't know, Nora.
welcome.
But it's, I would want to
I
say.
mean, didn't the
I see
Yahud,
what you're saying.
they
Yes,
would
yes, yes.
twist the ayat.
Right. Yes, you are right. Good job, Nora. Those would be the munafiqeen, that would twist the ayat and basically manipulate the ayat to saying certain things. It's kind of like what the Bani Israel were doing. Good job, Nura. Outstanding, good job. And I was like, oh, what is she talking about? Okay, now I see what you're talking about. Good job, Nura. And it's important, to understand that if you are going to read part of the ayah or part of the hadith and not take the rest, it's exactly going to be like the person reading فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ الَّذِينَ, and just reading فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ and not reading the rest of it and thinking that you got everything in place. And just exactly look at this one. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أَرَأَيْتَ الَّذِي يُكَذِّبُ بِالدِّينِ. You see those that would deny basically faith. And faith, whether we're speaking about understanding of God Almighty or whether we're speaking about the practices. So who are those people? Where those are the people that would harm the orphans, not recommend others to feed the needy, and therefore فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. This is an ayah, فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ, and woe unto the ones that are praying. Does that mean woe unto the ones that are praying? Does that mean I shouldn't be praying? Well, if you're going to take this out of context, well, then absolutely, that's the conclusion you're going to you're going to stumble across, and you basically find yourself basically seeing that the ayah is telling you that if you're praying, that's it, you're going to get in trouble, you're going to go to hell. But if you continue the ayah, الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ, who is basically here being cautioned, or basically who is this directed at? Well, the ayah continues, الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ, those that are not taking their prayers seriously. They're basically leaving the prayers and not taking it on time and not praying it on time. So therefore, taking one text and leaving the others is exactly like this one. You're taking this ayah and then you're like, oh, I shouldn't be praying, and not considering the rest of the different ayat that help you understand the evidences, the text right. So that's the rest of that ayah. Who is this referring to? فَوَيْلٌ لِلْمُصَلِّينَ. Is this what it means? But no. الَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنْ صَلَاتِهِمْ سَاهُونَ. This is warning those that are not taking their prayer seriously. They may be praying maybe a fard here or a fard there, etc., but then they're leaving out many others. That's what it's referring to. So for those that would take one text and say, well, those meant to likes people being beautiful, I would say, oh yeah. So you're just basically reading Fawaid al-Musallin and decided to not read the ayat in Surah An-Nur, or perhaps the ayat in Surah Al-Ahzab, and perhaps leave out the different ahadith, and therefore finding yourself that, oh, okay, you're thinking that you've got a text, but in reality, you're manipulating yourself. So we were supposed to take a minute. Noura, since you are here, is this the end of our class, or what do we do? What are we doing here?
We just wish it would never end.
Oh, okay. So,
Halas. I'm just no, I mean, let's
I mean,
take
the end of today's class. Hold on, that way we want to misunderstand it. The end of today's class. Okay. So the rest of the classes on Monday, right? Or no, Sunday for you
Sunday
guys.
and your Monday.
My Monday, but your Sunday. Okay. So this is
and somehow we're all in the same world.
We're all somehow, who knows how, but somehow, I don't know. I just remember taking a 24-hour flight and landing somewhere on this very far away island, and here I am. Yeah. So anyhow, so we'll continue, inshallah. Let's look at what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about tayammum, and that's dry ablution, basically when you don't have the necessary things. And
can I ask you one question about that real fast?
Go ahead, Nida.
Okay, so with the tayammum, let's say I know this is ahead of a bit, but I remember from the tafsir. So if somebody is musafir, yani they're traveling and or they're not able to, so they make tayammum and they didn't have a ghusl, sorry. Do they have to redo their salah? I couldn't remember.
If they had already prayed, okay, then they don't have to redo it. But if there was enough time, so let's say they landed in New York, okay, and that's where they live. They live in New York, okay.
Oh,
okay.
Then they would have to do it.
Wait up. And of course, they had already prayed, let's say using tayammum. They were in a major impurity. They were supposed to do ghusl, but of course that wasn't possible because they're on their flight. And then they landed. They had already did their tayammum. They're like, okay, I've got no choice but to do tayammum. They did their tayammum and they prayed duhr. Okay. And duhr is quite of, a couple good hours. And they basically prayed duhr on the flight, and they landed, okay, during duhr anyways. They got passed through security, passed through customs, blah, 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 all that stuff.
Yeah, and they still had time.
They still had time, okay? But they already prayed duhr, okay? They still had time to do a shower and pray duhr with the proper hygiene, let's call it major impurity removal, proper.
Oh yeah, they would have to make a ghusl, and then they would have to make a
some scholars actually said you would have to redo it, since right now you basically had the ability, the resources to do it right.
What's the preponderant ruling?
Preponderant is staying on the safe side and redoing it.
Okay, that makes sense.
Just the one that you had time for it. But all the other prayers that, who knows, you were probably in Amsterdam or probably.
I mean, I doubt this is going to happen to me, but I'm just wanting to learn, Yani.
Right. I mean, but all the other prayers, probably in Frankfurt, Amsterdam, whatever it is, you were there and you didn't have the ability. Well, Amsterdam is different because they actually have a shower area, second floor.
Wow.
Yeah, Amsterdam, they have a shower area, and yeah, so that's actually good news. But in the other airports. Heathrow doesn't have one. So if you're talking about other airports, they don't have a shower area. But let's just say you were in Amsterdam, okay? You were capable of going to the shower area, but there was not enough time, because if you were to go upstairs, basically the second floor, do the shower, and by the time you get to probably your flight, it's probably already boarding, basically had already finished. So in that situation, it's considered you didn't have the right enough enough time,
Mhm.
and it wasn't possible for you to do the showering. So in that situation, whatever you had prayed, okay, and you
It's
didn't have,
counted.
it's counted, and you don't have to redo it.
Okay, Jazakallah khair.
Okay, what yakum. So I hope I answered that one. And for those that never flew out of the United States, I would really recommend taking some time to basically visit other countries and see other worlds. It's quite exciting.
Maybe they'll come to Malaysia.
Maybe they'll come to Malaysia. You know, I was actually thinking about that yesterday. I was walking around the lake and just having a walk, and it was reminding me when we were in Painesville in Minnesota and doing the retreat right there. It was so beautiful, so serene, so calm, so beautiful just around the lake. Maybe we'll do one day. You never know, you know.
Maybe
I
they'll
always-
come to Palestine.
Maybe they'll come to Palestine, but the thing is that when we tried to do the retreats in Palestine, then all the different things happened in Palestine. So yeah, we wanted to keep everyone safe. So yeah, that's what happened.
Oh, have people come to visit.
Have people come to visit Palestine. Well, I mean, whether they're visiting or whether they're doing a retreat, it's going to be the same thing. It's going to be the same thing. So that was our problem. We were really hoping to do retreats in Palestine and get like a 2 or 3 month, like an extensive course in Palestine to learn Islam, and also learn Islam and do, you know, classes, but then all the different things were happening in Palestine. So that wasn't too safe. And I wanted to make sure that the students are safe and we are safe. And yeah, so it wasn't going to be doable, I guess. But when I came to Malaysia, I thought, well, I think that would be more doable than Palestine during this time, because yeah, I want to make sure that
Alhamdulillah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protected you and your family so you could teach us.
Ameen ya Rabbi, Ameen, Ameen, Ameen. But you know, I was really, really hoping that we would do kind of like a retreat in Palestine, but it really did not work out because definitely it wasn't going to be safe. It wasn't going to be safe for
But inshallah, Nasr Qareeb, inshallah.
Inshallah, inshallah, inshallah. But inshallah, maybe one day. So how is Malaysia? Do we have big spiders and stuff like that? Believe it or not, I had not actually seen a single spider here. Seen big cockroaches, but not the size of a chair. You know, just those big spiders. I would say, let me see, maybe half the size of your, well, I would say maybe, why say half? Just the size of your thumb, basically. Those are big spiders. I saw those very often. And ironically, my cat goes and catches those and brings them to my house, wanting to show me what they had
Oh no,
hunted.
that's
I know.
horrible.
I know he would hunt them outside and bring them to show me that, hey, look what I had brought you. And it's like, no, take that outside. But yeah, I guess he wants to show me his hunting skills.
He missed that class.
Exactly.